All right, we are now broadcasting. Very good.
Yes.
All right. Well, welcome, Tony, and welcome everybody who's joined us today to our very first Sonar Academy. Really excited to get this going. Tony and I have talked about this for a little while, and today's topic is data strategy in a post-pandemic world. Very interesting times, obviously, that we live in today. And the times lend itself to, we focus sometimes on the challenges, but actually, as Tony and I have talked over the past few weeks, there's also opportunities. So we'll get into that, but I'll spend a couple of minutes up front in terms of just a little bit of housekeeping and explaining what Sonar Academy is all about. So Sonar Academy is an initiative that we're starting to basically provide some morsels of insight to people. So around digital marketing and data. So the opportunity is small, short, sharp sessions, learn something new, get on with your day. So that's what the Sonar Academy is all about. I'm Scott Heron, for anybody who doesn't know. I'm a director at Sonar. And actually, Tony, maybe I'll just pass it over to you to give a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, for sure. Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me on the first fireside. So excited to be part of the Academy.
Yeah.
To everyone listening, wonderful to be in your presence. So thank you so much. So yeah, so like my background is I've been in the advertising data game for over 15 years. Grew up as an analyst in strategic planning departments throughout Sydney, at Leo Burnett and BMF, and then over in London for a little while at Wonderman, where Scott and I crossed paths, and then actually over in New York for 5 years, working at Big Spaceship as the head of analytics there, and then have come back to Australia, where Scott and I have crossed paths again. So I run my little consultancy called Roll Deep, which focuses on data strategy and analytics. And yes, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, very good, very good. So anybody who's watching, you'll see there's Q&A down below, and we're looking to try to do a format where we address Q&A ongoing, depending on the flow, but we'll also leave a little bit of time at the end for Q&A as well. So Tone, let's start with just kind of the umbrella view in terms of overall COVID and kind of a general point of view. What are some of the overarching things that you see relating to data strategy and COVID opportunities and challenges?
Yeah, it's such a fascinating time. I mean, and as you were saying, like there's all these challenges that people are feeling and facing, as well as companies, and we're all really mindful of that. And at the same time, there's this kind of question in the background of like, what does this mean for everyone in terms of business and of insight, and how do we then operate as an organization? Well, one of the things that like I've been thinking about and seeing and hearing a lot of is, we're all kind of living in this world where we're doing these Zoom calls, and I'm like, oh well. It's interesting because if you're a video company like Zoom or Google Hangouts or any of those platforms, you're probably seeing massive usage in your platform right now, and a lot of data is kind of coming in. So I would wonder if that's not just the case just for Zoom platforms, but for just digital and social platforms altogether. Like the volume of data that is going to be coming out because of how society and human interaction has fundamentally kind of changed is just, I think, going to lead to a lot of questions about, well, what do we do with all this data? And really interestingly, like with companies like Zoom, how do they then invest in their own platforms to then make this experience between customers and brands more interesting, right? Like more interactive. What are the features that they need to be incorporating?
And I think that's a really good point. So basically, COVID is providing more data than even before, and we're struggling with data even before. And because people can't do a physical event or whatever, they're using more virtual events. That's a data point. So a lot of companies rally themselves around to better understand how people are engaging with these additional digital and therefore data points, and then use them to get insight. But I also like your point around Zoom itself to better understand how to evolve their product based on how people are using it.
Right. The whole shift of like using this as a medium as a business, and like all of a sudden it feels almost more like a social platform in a lot of ways because it is a social thing that we're doing. And so, so like this as a medium for marketeers, as a data source for interacting with your customers, whether you're, doing educational videos, you're a yoga company, or you're actually just trying to do, even like, internal business conversations and thinking amongst, huge organizations. So collaboration tools as a medium with customers and within business, I see that as being really interesting space.
Yeah. Now, I guess like hand in hand with that, I mean, we saw with like the in Australia when you downloaded the government was saying, hey, download the app. There's the issue around privacy. So if there's more data and there's more touch points and there's more opportunity for people to be able to harness this in a positive way, or for companies to use this in a positive way, there's the flip side of how do we manage privacy? What's your take on how companies should respond to that?
Yeah, like that's interesting. It's funny, like with the COVID app and how that kind of came out. I think it was something like 6 million people downloaded it. Everyone's experience with that was really unique, right? Like my father-in-law, who's 73, and in the target area of being high risk, was all for it because he saw the value. He saw the value from it. It's like, if I can be helped by this, he downloaded it on day one. Whereas my brother-in-law lives in St. Kilda in Melbourne. It's like, it's not really for me, kind of thing. It's fine. Like I'm sure it'll be good. And I don't really trust the government. So I think it comes down to a higher sensitivity towards your audience and their appetite for not just data exchange in terms of value, but also like what their appetite to risk is in terms of, well, can I trust this company with my data? And if I can, how? And then on the flip side of that, as an organization, whether you're delivering, Uber Eats to people's doors or takeaway, or you're underwriting huge insurance policies, the baseline level of privacy and data security in terms of like knowledge and investment in companies feels like it should be going higher, because it's now part of like the narrative of society. So how can all companies think about, well, how am I resourcing with legal, and how am I resourcing with the data team, so that we're building things and building experiences that don't feel they're hiding anything, or they don't feel like they're intrusive. With the COVID app, people were really keen to understand the algorithm behind the app. Like, these are the times we're living in now. People want to know where the data is going and how it's being used, and that's a fascinating change in the narrative of the consumer market, I think.
Well, I think that's a good point. It's part of a broader point, I think, around the use of data and throughout this whole process. Like I'm just fascinated on how many Power BI visualizations and other things that have just been spread around by just normal people about the spread of things. It's kind of like raised up the conversation from that perspective, for sure. And maybe a good thing that it's kind of raised up a perspective around data and privacy as well. So, yeah. But a question for you relating to basically relating to industry, what are some of the anecdotes and that type of thing? Are there specific industries that you think will benefit more from this or not?
Well, I think it's interesting in the sense of like everyone's got to find their online business model now. Whether you're a yoga business to like a huge retailer like Amazon already, the implications will be far spread because one, there's going to be more data. Two, there'll be more interest around how that data is being used. And three, like people still are still looking for closeness in their relationships with each other, but also with brands, right? So I think broadly speaking, like how are brands now finding a way for their brand to come to life in a world where maybe it's a little more distant, where things like this might be more frequent than they used to be, where, they can't always have that face-to-face interaction. What is the way that the brand's going to come out? And I feel like entertainment is huge, like the sporting industry. I mean, goodness, like what are they going to do in terms of like getting sport back to people? And I love how that's been a huge topic in Australia about the NRL and the AFL, and like because it's such a big part of the identity. How do people get that same meaningfulness from the experience? And I think that's going to pose a really interesting challenge to that industry. So how teams and how organizations internally transform themselves so that they can go, oh, okay, we can deal with this new world that we're living in, is going to be quite a U-turn for a lot of industries, I think, especially around sports, entertainment, hospitality, obviously, tourism, all those areas.
Yeah, no, that's great. So let's dig into that a little bit in terms of, so I mean, obviously you consult with organizations, and we've talked about there are opportunities with COVID. So what do you think if you were an organization and that there's potentially an opportunity somewhere in there with COVID and coming out specifically of COVID?
Mhm.
what do you think, what would an organization need to do with some of those preliminary steps to try to get on their path to leveraging these opportunities?
Yeah, yeah. One huge question I think is, our what's our segmentation look like now? You know,
Mm,
like back in the day before all of this happened, it would be like you had demographic segmentation, attitudinal, behavioral, all that kind of stuff. And now there's a whole, like, I think undercurrent of narrative that I'm seeing people talk about, like introverted versus extroverted,
mm,
as a segmentation type. So this bubble has created this different point of view on how to look at people in terms of their values and their psychological biases in terms of extroverts and introverts, because introverts treat this very differently,
mhm,
and therefore how do you play a role, right? So looking at your segmentation and saying, is it really speaking to the social change that's happening with us nationally, internationally, as a society? And if it isn't, what does that look like? And then how can our current segmentation move towards that? And why? And
mm,
why? And having all those questions kind of being held simultaneously in the conversation at leadership level, where it's, what does it look like? What did it look like? What can it look like? And why should it look like that? And how do we do that in a way where it feels like it's taking progressive steps with our budget, with our resources, but not over investing so much that we're kind of doing ourselves in the wrong way, if that makes
mhm.
sense.
Yeah. So overall, they're like, okay, we see an opportunity around COVID. We think we needed to review how we do our segmentation of audiences in a different way than we have historically. And
Mm.
then a little bit of a sort of a roadmap or proof point so that you're not over investing down that path. So like, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. So it goes everything from like the quality of the data, the technical sources of where the data is coming from, what's being used for, and rethinking all of that, whilst not forgetting a really important part, which is the human aspect of how people work with that data inside the company. What is the narrative and the questioning that happens around that data so that it can be brought out in tests, create samples for building their MVP of products, new feature sets, and for that to happen in a way where maybe there's more fluidity between different teams,
Mm,
between data teams and product teams, between research teams and communication teams, between media teams and advertising
yeah.
teams.
So that's a beast. What you're talking about right there is like, so that's been one of the challenges that I've seen across organizations is people operating in silos and trying to come up with, just trying to get out of the gate, to be honest, like just trying to get moving so that we can break down the silos and get a proof point and that type of thing. What are
Yeah.
some of your sort of pro tips along those lines?
I mean, it is a beast of a thing, because like I think even before this all kind of kicked off, like what I was seeing around the world, and definitely the UK and US, was a lot of this transformation was heavily underway already. There was huge tech transformation. You had big tech platforms coming in and kind of implementing themselves, and that was kind of causing all this need to transform. And then this happens, and so it feels like even today, it's true that the alignment of goals and the alignment of leadership is probably more crucial than ever, because of the changing nature of the world that we're living in. And I know it sounds simplistic, but in my experience, when you're working with especially organizations that have been around for a while and have like a set culture, set rituals, set way of doing business, right? How can they work together now to go, okay, well, who are the right departments? Who are the heads of those departments? How can they come together and say, well, what's the key thing? What's the one thing that we're trying to do here, which gets everyone from cross departments to go, yep, I see what you're saying there. I see what you're saying in terms of importance. I'm emotionally invested into that goal. And because of that, I'm willing to trade off on other things that I'm currently doing, so that 4 people in my team can have 50% of the allocation work on this project for 3 months, and I'm willing to protect them from a leadership standpoint. And so even just creating the operational space to have that happen is a huge step forward, because without that, there's nothing but just straddled strategies happening left, right, and center, and it can feel like you're spinning nonstop. So there's a sensation that you get where you feel really busy with your strategies, your planning, your analytics, and production, and you're making things kind of happen, but it feels a little bit noisy, and people don't know whether or not they're required or responsible to do project A, project B, project C or D or all of them.
Hmm.
And so it does feel like the first big step in my experience to get clarity around what's important is to have that conversation of, well, what is the thing that we're trying to do? Is it market share growth? Is it understanding our customer database a bit deeper? Is it whatever it might be? And then having people get clarity on that, understand why that mission is the most important one, and then getting emotional buy-in in terms of, yes, like that's something I'm committed to because I believe in it. Is so easy to say, so hard to do.
Yeah, I'm with you. Like quite often from my experience, the data projects has been the additional thing on top of someone's current workload. So there hasn't been the conversation about how that fits with the existing priorities and that type of thing as well. So having the executive buy-in and then the emotional buy-in around, the vested thing, I see how this is actually going to help the overall organization is definitely pretty key.
Right. And just one of the things that came to mind when you were talking about that was, so there's that level of kind of getting that space. The other is making sure there's not a disconnection between people making those decisions and those who are seeing the data day to day. Like in my experience, like when you put people who have a strategic creative mind with people who are working with the actual information, the insights are almost embodied in the analysts or people working in the data. And it's just a matter of getting to talk about it in a way where they go, oh, okay, what's happening in the customer base? What's happening in the community? Is our segmentation around high value customers actually true? And if it is, what are they doing? And usually in that conversation between the person who's up to their eyeballs in the data and the one who has the vision leads to where the insight happens. And that relationship is crucial.
Got it. So here's a good question from James, who's watching here. Is the data we're viewing now during COVID a little bit fuzzy because it's kind of this artificial life we're currently living, and how do we take that into account or make sense of that?
Good question. The data that was looking at is currently a bit fuzzy. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that. I think it's fair to say that it's happening so real time. Like the way I've been talking about this whole experience, it's almost like Groundhog Day and Inception have come together, and it's just the repeat thing over and over. It's like a dream within a dream, day after day. It's like what is actually real anymore? And so I only think that in time, I think a few things are kind of needed to bring any kind of validity to the data that's happening today. Is that there needs to be, I guess, first of all, the acknowledgement that the data that we have now isn't perfect, right? There's an imperfection to it, and in that you need human intervention, you need human insight. And I think so long as businesses and companies are holding that truth of, we have something here which can tell us something about the landscape of today, but at the same time, we know that our experience in the business and our knowledge of the business and our knowledge of the customers are equally valid. Therefore, how do those two things come together, and what does that mean hypothetically for the business's growth?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you're right. Like you got to keep your head on your shoulders. I mean, I'm picturing like what would be Woolworths data potentially, and be like, oh my God, people who buy peanut butter buy 700 rolls of toilet paper.
Yeah.
So you got to keep your head on your shoulders and that kind of thing. But one of the opportunities is hopefully baking in an agile way of working too. And so if you see a trend in the data, to be able to test it through a kind of a SWAT team and a confined test to validate it could potentially give you some more insights and make you move from there.
Right. And so like what that triggers in me is like I feel like there's going to be a new mode for organizations to jump into. Like most companies have like PR crisis mode, and like they're going to a certain set standard operating procedure around that. There's governance to that, whereas there's no governance to this. And so maybe it's true that in the future, when hopefully it doesn't, but I wouldn't be surprised kind of thing, there's another one of these, it happens, the world and the organizations go, oh, okay, we can go into lockdown mode. Therefore, we know people are going to most likely behave like this. Therefore, here's what they need to hear from us. Here's what they actually want from us. And here's how we can help them. And here's what we shouldn't be doing. That to me would be amazing if organizations could be better prepared through their data to serve society in a way that's helpful for them when this kind of thing turns up.
Well, and going back to your earlier point, maybe that also means because of the new segmentation models, you're more equipped to deal with what you might be expecting from a consumer behavior aspect as well. So ways to test that stuff out, which would be
Right.
really interesting. Yeah.
Right. Like our online savvy shoppers are going into introversion mode. And so it's going to be all of these different characteristics. You know?
Yeah, that's right. And it's been interesting to see some evolution around data partnerships. So, you know, the holy grail of combining some of these data things together in a meaningful way. So like, you know, I saw a press release this week on the role of TV and using TV set boxes and then combining that with live ramp data so that you can more understand the role of TV in driving actual purchase behavior and intent. And again, new segmentation models. So in some ways, it seems like COVID has accelerated some of these data partnerships to help maybe to evolve to some of the segmentation models you're talking about.
Yeah. Yes. That's an interesting partnership. And I feel like what's behind that is there's like this sense of in-house, and also this sense of locality, you know, so I don't know if it's still a thing here, but you know, again, back in the day, like local area marketing was huge. It was really important. And then I felt like the world got much more IoT and the rest of it. There almost seems to be a shift back to, because of this kind of stuff, like what's happening in your home, what's happening in your community, what's happening in your neighborhood, and an importance of like, you know, the quality of life and the quality of your experience in your four households, in your four rooms, or in the down the street, or the local chess club, or whatever it might be. So yeah, partnerships that focus on local data feels like it's a smart thing to do.
That's a good point. There's a company that I knew about post-COVID called Neighborlytics. And basically their premise is basically taking social data from Facebook and other platforms and aggregating that, but at a geo-targeted level. So instead of using Roy Morgan or whatever, where they go and kind of go door to door and ask them questions, this is taking a whole bunch of stuff together on what people are talking about in a postal code. Right. And that was pre-COVID. I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting to see what people are talking about pre-COVID. But now, like in the mix and post, it's like, wow, that could be a really interesting, you know, data source for geolocated advertising.
Right. And then like, you know, the reinvention of direct marketing and local area marketing and all that kind of stuff kind of all comes back. It's funny how this stuff moves in cycles, but yeah, it feels like that's around the corner too.
Yeah. So yeah, another question, this one coming from Sergey. In your experience, have you seen any companies successfully leverage data in the pandemic to inform their marketing and communication strategy, et cetera?
That's a good question. I think like during the pandemic at this point in time, like what I'm seeing a lot of companies do is shift their dollars into, you know, COVID response marketing. You know, so I feel like there's a lot of advertising that I'm seeing and hearing about and reading about, which is, you know, very much about, you know, here's what you can do during the crisis. Here's how you can make the most of working at home. How are you? That kind of tone, which I really appreciate. My sense of it is that that's probably the safest place to reinvest budget if you had budget for other things during this time. And then the question becomes, like we were talking before, you know, what patterns are coming out of this period. And it could be true that this goes on for another 6-7 months in some forms, you know, in some places in the world. So with the shift internally in an organization saying we need to have a team that looks at, you know, the COVID data, or our customer data in the light of COVID, and how we can then really support them through this as people come out, feels like I could imagine lots of conversations inside organizations where that is the topic, and how we get the resources for those teams and what they look like and who leads that team and how it works. So yeah, at the moment, that's what I'm seeing, and that's why Intuit is happening inside organizations right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting times because you're seeing so much. I mean, I guess for me, from a positive perspective, there's so much happening in terms of trialing new things, in terms of messaging, new products, new attempts at platforms, and that type of thing.
Yeah.
I don't have a crisp case study on like the holy grail of what's worked, but I suspect that, well, I know firsthand that some companies are really excelling through the pandemic. and excelling from like, you can see the retail stores, online retail going through the roof.
Yeah.
But also excelling from more like the member organization sides of financial institutions and that type of thing, where they're striking gold on member communications and doing that in a way that's resonating to, I guess, provide empathy, but then also use it to better, it's kind of like better holding out their first party data. And so again, maybe this is a roundabout example for you, but we know that we're going to be moving towards a world where we're not using third-party cookies, and companies have been like, okay, this is coming. What do we do? And so I think COVID has been an opportunity for people to start to flex their muscles on first-party data and their own customer data and round that out in a way that's going to provide them with more of a strategic asset in the future. And COVID was probably the impetus to be like, we got to do something, and that was a good starter for them.
I would even add to that and say, like, if it's possible, start talking to your customers in small focus groups, like create focus groups in Slack channels, create focus groups in Zoom calls, and just get a vibe of how people are feeling, especially if you can get a representative sample from like a segment you're really curious about. Just add some flavor to the emotional flavor to the quantity that's there and the first party data that's there. Like that could be really insightful.
Yeah. All right. So with just a couple of minutes left, Tony, do you want to just kind of offer up do you have any kind of last or parting thoughts for anyone?
No, like I'm super grateful just to have this time to connect with people. Like it's wonderful just to be a part of, of Sonar's Academy and have people just meet and talk about data in a pandemic. What a weird thing, but here we are, right? Yeah. So my passion is this. I love talking about data, but also organizations and how data finds its way through organizations and change. I do a bit of coaching, I do a bit of consulting, and yeah, it's kind of the thing that I am so fascinated to see how groups changed in this time and also help groups change through this time, because there's a ton of uncertainty, and through uncertainty, you have to be adaptable, resilient, be focused, all those kinds of things. And that's kind of what I've been doing. So yeah, I love this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And do you want to throw out an offer to the guys watching at all?
Well, sure. I mean, if anyone is keen or wants to do any coaching or any consulting, I would love to have a chat, like have a virtual coffee or, anything like that, just to talk about where you are with your data situation, with your teams, with, the challenges that you're facing. And just have a bit of a session and bounce the ball around this topic would be fantastic.
Hopefully we get a real coffee going soon,
That would be great. That'd be so good. Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll wrap up. I want to thank everybody for joining. So just kind of in summary then, so there are definitely significant opportunities in around COVID in terms of just having more data, be able to segment that data and be able to color that data with more qual and everything else in order to figure it out. In order for organizations to take advantage of it, you got to definitely have the focus from the executive to help to manage things. Be clear around the KPIs and have that kind of drill down into the individual's KPIs, and hopefully have the individuals be vested as well. And then get out of the gates. Don't go too hard, too fast. Do kind of the proof point with a feasibility and that type of thing. But we're seeing like in the marketplace, lots of people trying different things out and everything else. So very interesting times. And I'm sure it's we're not through it all yet, but more to come.
Totally.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot, Tony. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.